A couple of things. We are in the stewardship time of year and planning our giving, so it's important that you make that commitment and register that commitment either by clicking online or filling out the pledge card and leaving it and folded up in the offering plate on the tables out there. The admin team will be meeting middle of December to put together the budget for the coming year, and it's important that we have as much information as possible to do that. Also, one of the neat things about the Holiness Ministry grant program is that it can be funding that goes to a specific nonprofit, or it can be just a single project. The flexibility that we have and we've allowed with that program has resulted in so many things. She mentioned the pictures lining the walls. We've added some back this week. There are a few more over here to come. But we take them down at the beginning of November every year beginning of November to stewardship time to remind us what would not have happened without this commitment that we've given to the Holiness Ministry Grant Program over these last number of years. We're grateful for your support. Today we have a special treat. We have a couple of representatives from two different organizations that we have given some Holiness Grant funding to, and we're going to have some time to learn about those ministries this morning. First, we're going to have Denise Sears, who is the president and CEO of the SOS organization, Delivering a World of Health and Hope. And Denise, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Denise, start off as we did last time. I should have held the microphone till we both get up here. But start off as we did last time, just describing SOS and what the organization is.
SOS is a global health nonprofit. We collect surplus medical supplies and equipment that is no longer needed in our community, and we deploy it to areas in need. A large portion of these go overseas to developing countries, and some items stay in our own community, but we're going to focus, I think, on the international part of the story today.
Right. And so organizationally, are you just here in Kentucky as an operation? Or what?
Yes. Our facility is in Butchertown. We have one facility, although we're serving over 100 countries and over 300 local organizations in the state of Kentucky. So a lot comes out of one location. We are one of only 7 organizations in the United States that has been awarded accreditation in the collection and redeployment of surplus medical supplies. It's important to do it right. Sometimes we can do things with good intentions, but not have the outcome because we didn't follow certain guidelines and practices. And that's why we're very proud of that distinction of having been awarded that by the MedSurplus Alliance of the Task Force for Global Health.
What was the particular project that our Holiness Ministry grant supports for you?
And there's a little country in Africa called Malawi. It's about the size of Pennsylvania. 98% of the people in the country earn between $100 and $200 US per year. There are over 1 million orphaned or vulnerable children under the age of 18. It is predominantly a rural agricultural country with a tremendous absence of medical care. Just a clinic or a hospital. Many times there's nothing in a region that they can access, or if they have to travel a great distance, it means then they're not working. So we work with a ministry there, Kasupi Ministries. Fletcher Padoko founded it. He's been to SOS. If you ever watch our video, the one where multiple partners are saying thank you, he's the last one, and he actually says thank you in the language of Malawi. I tear up every time I hear him say thank you. So thanks to your generous church, we were able to send a large ocean-going container, 40-foot container, to Malawi that will serve 7 clinics. Several of them were opened with a shipment that we sent 2 years ago, and it arrived just as COVID was hitting. This container will arrive just as they're starting to get a second wave. So very important timing. And it will provide everything from Band-Aids and dressings to bassinets for babies, to ventilators, to crutches. There is approximately 100, they would have to have spent 150,000 approximately to get all of these supplies at used prices, right? And thanks to your support, they just had to come up with some of the shipping. And so they will get that thanks to you all.
Awesome. How did you come to be a part of SOS?
My journey, I always say that if somebody had said I would be at SOS, 15 years ago, I would have said, no, I'm like, I work in corporate. I support nonprofits, but I don't work for them. In 2012, my beautiful daughter, she was my only child at the time, 23, passed away. And I really needed to find a new purpose because she had been my purpose for 23 years. What really was laid on my heart was to help prevent other mothers and fathers around the world from knowing that pain because they were experiencing it for preventable reasons. They are experiencing it because their child is unable to get vaccinated for polio. They're getting it because their child got cut. They're barefoot. They're walking around in the village. They get cut. It becomes infected. They become septic, and they lose a child. The average parent in an African country, over 50% lose a child at some point. So that became my calling.
Talk about the volunteers that work with you and how can people be involved? What would they do?
So we are a small staff. We use every dollar that comes in as efficiently and responsibly as possible. And we rely completely on philanthropic support. We don't have any other stream of revenue. So we only have a team of 14 to collect from over 100 hospitals across 4 states and deploy these to over 60 countries per year and 300 local organizations. So the volunteers are the backbone of our organization. You come in, you help sort these supplies that come in from the hospital. And it's not always technical. It can be gloves and masks, and we make it easy. We make it fun. And you then are helping prepare the medical supplies so that they can be redistributed to a partner in need, whether it's here or whether it's in Malawi.
During the pandemic, did you have any particular efforts focused because of the pandemic?
Yes, we had just actually formally implemented a local health program, which was important because we're a global health organization. I kept saying, if global includes local, we have to also worry about our own backyard as well as across the ocean. That happened in November 19. So when COVID hit, our presence in the local community was crucial. We deployed over $1 million worth of medical supplies across our state. We served over 54 nursing homes who were really at the bottom of the chain of being able to get supplies as they were made available, rightfully so. They were going to hospitals first, but there were many other healthcare organizations in the line that needed them. So masks and gloves and protective gowns, we sent them all over the state to nursing homes. And we also furnished hospitals. I had an emergency call from Hardin Memorial, which is now Baptist, on a Sunday night. They were running out of a particular item. So that's what we did, while at the same time we continued our international work, because that was important. When you are in the middle of a pandemic, and this one's going to go away, but there will be another one at some point. Focusing on health around the world protects health here in our own community.
If I were to volunteer and said I'm available for the next 4 weeks in a row, what would you have me do?
First, I'd hug you, okay, and say thank you. I'd have you come in. You can come in Monday through Friday in the morning or afternoon. It's about 2.5 hours of sorting. And we would put you on a sort to help prepare a shipment. We have shipments scheduled right now for Cuba, to a hospital and clinic in Cuba. And right on the heels of that, there's one to Nigeria and one to Sierra Leone. I mean, it's every time you come and everything you touch, we may say this is appropriate for an overseas deployment. This is more appropriate to stay local. And so you will be touching thousands of lives in a 2.5-hour segment.
Awesome. Any questions for you guys? Anybody? Over here?
So the field of global health is actually pretty small. Once you start working in a country, word does travel. We are also part of the MedSurplus Alliance and the Task Force for Global Health. We have many partners in countries who we've worked with who shout our praises. Sometimes that can even get up to, a health minister level. So really it is a lot word of mouth. But you do remind me of a moment when I had reached SOS. It was January 2017. I'd been there 30 days, and I had the same question. Because at the time, they were only sending out 6 shipments per year. And one of the things I wanted to do was to increase them because there was such a need. Having, in my corporate life, I knew business development. But how do you reach international? And if you do it well, people will come.
Okay. Another question right here.
We are down in Butchertown. We are on Arlington Avenue, just up from, just off Story Avenue. No, not Story. Melwood and, oh my gosh, I'm completely blanking. I only drive there, every day. But right up from Melwood.
She has business cards that she's happy to hand out, so you can reach out to her to get more information or to schedule a time to come in and volunteer. Oh, a question over here, Patty.
Yes. So we do work with a lot of other organizations. For instance, when the earthquake that hit Haiti, we were the first organization to get supplies into Haiti because we worked with UPS and we worked with a nonprofit that had feet on the ground in country. Doctors Without Borders, we work with a lot of physicians. We don't do a lot with them. I don't know that they need us, okay? But there are a lot of organizations similar to that that we do work with.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
you
so
all
much.
very much.
Your mask. Next up, we have Leah Nord, who is the Community Engagement Manager for CASA. Leah, come on up and share with us. Thanks again for being here this morning.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Grateful to be here.
First question, again, tell us about CASA.
Sure. So CASA is a national organization. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. We are currently in 49 states. When we think about our local program, CASA of the River Region, we are serving children across 6 different counties. So touching the lives of children in Jefferson County, Trimble, Henry, Oldham, Shelby, and Spencer counties. CASA was originally formed through the idea of a judge, a juvenile court judge by the name of David Sukope. Judge Sukop had a case in front of him where he was trying to determine permanency for a little girl, a 3-year-old, in a case where it was presumed that there was physical abuse. So we think about the children in the populations that we work with, specifically children who've been abused and neglected. In this particular case and on this particular day, it dawned on this judge that he just simply did not have enough good information to make a decision for this little girl, whether she would return home to natural family or whether she would be removed permanently from the home and living outside the home in what we call out-of-home care. And so because of this revelation, Judge Sukop sort of launched the initiative, which was calling on community volunteers who would become trained to serve as the voice for children in family court. Our children do not attend their own court hearings for good reason. And so we need someone there who can speak on behalf of the child and advocate for their best interest.
Okay. Beyond being there for the child in court, what other activities does the advocate do?
Really fun activities, So a lot of the work is hard, and I don't want to sugarcoat that, but our volunteers show up in a wide variety of ways for our CASA kiddos, whether that's attending a sporting event to be a friendly face and a support system, whether that's showing up at their child's school to grab lunch with them in the cafeteria. Our CASA volunteers are involved in ways that we're so thankful for. It's not required of them, and I think it really speaks to the relationship that our CASA advocates build with their children, really their desire, wanting to be there for the child as a friend, a friend first, and a mentor, and then an advocate when it really matters most in family court.
How did you come to be a part of CASA?
Well, so I've always had a heart for healing. I've been very drawn to social services and child welfare. And so what led me to CASA was previous work working with foster and adoptive families. I used to serve as the individual who would license our homes, some of our homes here in Kentucky, through a private agency. Through that work, I got to see sort of hands-on, getting my own hands dirty and seeing what it looks like to work with children who are coming from trauma backgrounds. It's messy, it's complicated, it's hard work. And, I think about the individuals that I worked with previously in that role and the folks, our CASA volunteers. We can't do what we do without our volunteers. And so moving over to CASA was a really natural segue for me, same population of children. So when we think about our foster children who, again, are living in out-of-home care, whether with a foster family or in residential services, or children who still remain in the home with natural families but are receiving services from the state, I knew that I wanted to stay in that space. And really moving from the agency that I was working with to CASA was a family decision. I myself am a mother. I have twin boys that are turning 6 years old in a couple of weeks. They keep reminding me everything that's on their list, both for Christmas and birthdays. And, I really wanted to be there for them more and make sure that I had a work-life balance that felt really appropriate for our family as a whole. And so I'm happy to be on board with CASA.
Great. Do you have any particular stories about one of your advocates and maybe some things they've done?
Yeah, it's really fun to hear about the work that our advocates do. So, much of my day and time is spent out in the community, recruiting new volunteers. But when you think about the sort of everyday small and big things that our volunteers are doing for their kids, I'll just share a few with you. Over the last couple months, we had a CASA volunteer who went and picked up KFC, a family dinner, for one of our families that was in quarantine. So we had a CASA child that was staying at the time with a foster family, and she went and dropped it off on the door. We had another CASA volunteer who because of travel restrictions, some of our CASA volunteers will be matched with children who live quite far from them. But this particular CASA volunteer wanted to have really consistent interaction and communication with her child. So they started up this once a week. She would call her CASA child and read to her bedtime stories. We had another CASA volunteer that went to a first soccer game for a CASA child who was participating in, group activity for the very first time. So our CASA volunteer was there not only, again, to serve as a friendly face and somebody who's supporting that child and showing up for them, but also to sort of serve as someone that is taking in how is this child doing in these types of settings, right? Because again, our CASA volunteers are the voice in family court. So how is my child doing in social settings? How is my child interacting with other teammates and the coach and so on and so forth?
What's required of volunteers and what kind of training do you provide?
So we do, our checks and balances from an administrative perspective. So we're going to run those background checks. We're going to gather references from our volunteers. We also have an opportunity for volunteers to sit down with our director of advocacy, Sherry Christoph, and have a conversation where they can ask questions of Sherry, learning about the role just as much as Sherry is learning about them to determine if this is a good fit. Then from there, if it does feel like a good fit, our volunteers are enrolled in training. And because of the pandemic, our training has been moved to an online platform. So many of you, here today, maybe you're familiar with some of the online sort of gathering platforms that are being used in the pandemic as a way to still gather and get together. And I'll say that I've heard from a lot of folks, just the convenience factor. They don't have to go anywhere. They could be eating their favorite meal, sort of on their own couch at home, dialed into these meetings. But they end up attending 5 sessions online. They're 3 hours apiece, and they're either in the evenings on Thursdays from 6 to 9 p.m. or Saturday mornings from 9 to noon. Once they finish those classes and they graduate, then they choose which county they would like to serve in. So again, we have 6 different counties that we touch, our local program. So folks will choose if they want to be working in their own backyard, or maybe they have another county where they'd like to serve where the need is a bit higher. They're sworn in to the family court by the family court judge of which they'll serve. And then at that point, they're ready to select a case.
Great. The wholeness grant that we gave to CASA was to help with expenses and supportive training. And so that's how we've been involved. Any questions from you guys?
And I will just say, to add on to that, for every 2 volunteers that we train, that we get all the way through training, only 1 volunteer on average will take a case. And so the dollars, the funds that we use towards our recruitment and training is crucial to keep our program going, because not every time does it end up being a great fit, or folks have different seasons in life where things come up and they may put it on the back burner. And so we're very grateful.
Great. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have a special treat this morning because we happen to have a retired family court judge in our midst. Judge Deb DeWeese served in that capacity for several years. Deb, if you'll come on up, and I'm going to ask her a couple of questions from a judge's perspective, having labored in family court and knowing Deb personally. Lainey and I have known Deb and Bennett for a number of years, and knowing her struggle and her commitment to work in that family court. It takes a special person to do that, and Deb, you are one of those special people. So you can stand or sit, or we can just stand and talk.
So I get up there, I'm going to fall.
And you're going to have to hold this mic right there.
Okay.
Just describe your experience with CASA in general from a judge's perspective.
Well, from the judge's perspective, there are always too many kids and not enough hands to help. And so what CASA does is bring another set of eyes to a scenario with a family, because we're dealing with the family, we're dealing with the children, we're dealing with the parents, the extended family a lot of times. And so the CASA volunteer is another person who's on scene and on site, who can talk about what's going on in the home, who can give us insight into the children and to the parents. And so it's information that that we are getting from a different source than the usual sources.
Okay. And as you interact with a CASA person in the courtroom, do they speak to you in the courtroom, or do they file reports with you?
They do both. They do both.
Okay.
Usually we had a report, and then also the CASA volunteers are in the courtroom because during the course of a day, they might be asked to take a case. So they're there, and so they give reports and they give testimony and information to the court, so it can be done both ways.
One of the conversations we've had through the years is, again, as she just mentioned, the need for the judge to have as much information as possible is so critical. And the times that we've seen Deb struggle with decisions just because she needed more information, hoped to have more information. So these are important. What percentage of children in family court have a CASA person assigned?
Well, I mean, not as many as, because I think we know from the CASA folks, there's never enough volunteers. That's true. It's a real commitment. It is not simply just I'll show up, I'll talk to the kids, I'll write something on a piece of paper, and I'll come to court. There's just a hands-on involvement, and not only is it very time-consuming, but it can be very emotional for the volunteer, because these are kids in need. These are families in need. We've had CASA volunteers who go to schools and go to functions, but they're also helping in the family. A lot of them would be taking the moms or the dads to counseling sessions or job interviews or to the grocery. The need is tremendous. And we never have enough, and part of that is it's a tremendous request for involvement, from an engagement from someone in a family in need, and that's tough.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Deb. Just want to spend a moment before we go to our time of communion, sharing a couple of scripture passages relevant to what we've talked about today. In Matthew chapter 19, you may recall the story where Jesus is in the midst of a crowd and children are being brought to him. People brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked them. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." When he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there. Probably the least valuable humans in that world at that time were children, as far as appreciated and respected. This passage has always meant a lot to me as a child growing up, but in having children, but just the reminder that we are to pay attention and to care for those who need care. We have responsibilities corporately beyond our own families to reach out and to be supportive of children. And then in Matthew chapter 25, Jesus is talking about the end times when there be some division going on between those that have been faithful and those that have not been faithful. And this reminds me of the SOS mission and as well as CASA. The king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Amen.